Every time I do this, I'm conscious of being in the company of our most remote ancestors. They may not have quite understood what they were doing, bringing this bright, greedy flower, this untamable pet, fire, in from the wild. But when they did, they changed human nature altogether. Fire was the single element that they could harness and control, or thought they could, and after that, they stepped out of the animal kingdom and were ready to take over the world. I think fire's closest to water, ironically, though they seem to be opposites, enemies. As with water flowing under a bridge, you can stare into an open fire for hours, emptying your mind or discovering worlds in the embers under the flames. As flies to wanton boys, are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. No, of course I'm not going to do it. In fact, at the age of 8, it was the first example of conscious human cruelty that I ever witnessed. I was sickened and somehow ashamed. The temptation's latently there within us, though, as is the awful tugging to watch something like that, even as it appalls us. Fire has brought out the worst in us always. Firearms, that irresponsible ability to kill mechanically and at long distance. If you've ever seen a city under attack, you'll find it very hard to watch a firework display. I can't. But for children, as they say, of all ages, they're things of wonder and delight, if ever there was a double-edged sword. I think of you really as running a sort of a military operation. But I think of the guys who are in Afghanistan now, who are in territory that they can only be partially trained to understand, who are dealing with an enemy that is completely unpredictable. I have a sense that you guys do know the territory and that you do know the enemy. Does it ever take you by surprise?
I would say frequently, and the fact that as much as you want to train, we still feel the same thing as far as the paramilitary or the military parallel you give, that it's an animal that we haven't tamed. We lose over 100 firefighters annually in North America. And again, it's because of the unpredictable nature of that and all of the events that go with it.
Every fire is different, it seems. You know, most of the time we can control it, but every once in a while we get caught.
You say that we know our territory, but we don't. We don't know every house in the city. Every house is different. You can pull up to a scene and you can see a bungalow and try to figure out where the hallways are and things like that, but when you walk in, it's completely black. So you just follow the wall and try to figure out where it is, but we don't really know our territory until we're in it, until everything's put out, and then you see, oh, that's where that hallway leads to.
I think it's a personality that we just have to grow to respect. That if you ever take it for granted, it will bite you.
When fire gets loose, it's the great eraser of properties, memories, life. Nothing spells loss like fire does. The centuries fall away before it.
But I suppose the thing that started it was a peculiar noise. And that's a funny thing, because Clifford can listen to children run around and scream all evening and still stay sleeping.
That there was this awful whirring noise all the time we were doing this, that I could just had to find out what this was.
Well, that's what woke you up in the first place, because normally we don't get up in the middle of the night much.
And to this day, I don't ever remember hearing the fire alarms as I was going through the house until I went into the utility room, which was not far from Blake's room, and I tried to find what it was. Finally, I unplugged the central vac, and the wires from, you know, investigating later, they must have, from the fire, melted, and when they fuse together, they start to vacuum up, but none of the outlets are open, so the vacuum just goes faster and faster and faster. And when I unplugged that, then I could hear all the fire alarms. And that house was...
We would have just kept on sleeping if it wasn't for that central vac. So, needless to say, the central vac was one of the first things put into the new house.
When I got up, it was bad enough you couldn't go through the house. The smoke was so low, and it just hit you right in the face, like it was...
Knocked him down pretty near.
Green, just unbreathable air that it just sent... Well, your skin crawls, like it just doesn't... You don't feel anything. And my first thing was, and then it comes to you to drop.
Smoke's as bad as fire, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Maybe worse, maybe worse. And that's one thing that one aspect of the fire we maybe don't understand as much is how many gases are maybe in the smoke, how toxic they are for us, how they can permeate our gear, get into our skin and get into our system, and also how those gases can be very explosive and cause things like flashovers and backdrafts and things like that. And so the fire, if we see a fire burning, we know we can deal with it, hopefully, but it's that smoke that can sneak up on us.
And it was the strangest feeling, because you could see a ceiling of smoke which was only maybe a foot above their heads. And they're just sleeping there, just
still asleep.
Fast asleep in the bed.
Yeah. So I woke up Dylan, which was the biggest one, but I realized as I woke him up, he was scrambling and he was trying to get into the house, which was no good, and he didn't realize, like, he just woke up. So I had to grab his arm in order to hold on to him so he didn't run into the center of the house.
Where the worst of the smoke was. There was so much of this smoldering, and that's what had filled the house with smoke. Yeah. And I guess that's what kills most people in a house fire, is the smoke, not the fire. And you always think of, oh yeah, what I would do if there was huge mountains of flame, but you don't often encounter that. You just encounter this wall of smoke.
But it was
either chokes you or disorients you or whatever. But
thick, light green.
It's a really nasty
tacky
smell, you know. It's a
just
burning plastic and
I don't know if it was plastic.
It sticks to you,
yeah,
kind of
sticks.
almost.
It's just like varnish almost. You know, it's just thick. And when the fire department came, that's what I told him. Like, it's sick in there, eh? And he says, that's okay. We got supplied oxygen, and they went in, and they used two firemen went in, and I thought to myself, like, this isn't right. Like, I just come out of there and they're sending in these 18 and 20-year-old kids. This is crazy. Like, I run into the fire to save my family, which is, you know, I can visualize that and make sense out of that. But these guys run away from their families to come to this fire.
In the beginning part, it's more, you have to slow yourself down, think about what's going on.
We're pretty busy in the back, getting prepared, physically, mentally, getting our gear together, making sure we have everything we think we need, thinking about what we're going to. If it's an apartment fire, you think about different things. But yeah, the mood would change.
Your time frame is also compressed. I mean, you think about from receipt of alarm, they're on the trucks and rolling in 60 seconds or less. And then from that point, it's 4 minutes or less until they're actually on scene. So there's a lot of information that has to be brought back and forth amongst the crews, the officers, the dispatchers, to try and put a bit of a game plan together. And lots of it just comes back to to training.
The sirens are blaring and the horns being honked and you're rushing through traffic. There's quite a bit of adrenaline.
But I think you feel the rush of excitement, like a roller coaster rush of excitement. I think you feel that afterwards when the fire's out and you're putting things back together and you know you've done a good job and there's that camaraderie, and I think that's when that kind of excitement comes out.
The firemen were fairly good at, you know, trying to grab things and hand stuff out. So some of the...
And then at a point there, he said, it's just too dangerous. You cannot go in there anymore. It just seemed like once it got going, it just...
There was no slowing it. There was sort of a
come
point
out,
of no return kind of a...
Yeah, the fire would come out the top windows and go back in the basement windows. And in a matter of a few seconds...
You mean literally sort of doing
it was rolling. Yeah, and they've never seen that. He said, but when the inspector was there, he said, well, it's understandable. And I says, how do you mean? And he says, well, you guys never broke enough windows to give it any air. So basically, that's what they told us, to shut the door, shut the windows, get out of that house, and that's what they told us on 911. So that's basically what we did. And by the time I got to my dad's and back, like I had to borrow some clothes from him and some rubber boots, and by the time I got back to the house, they were there. It seemed like it was...
The fire department was pretty quick, all right.
But...
And they tried, you know, and I think even to this day, they are personally bothered by the fact that they weren't able to do more. And really, in the way things were, I don't think there was anything they could have done that they didn't do. But it was quite a horrifying thought after the fact that there were young men in the basement trying to put out a fire, and when the stairs burnt and fell down, if there'd been anyone down there, I don't know if you could have gotten them out. I suppose they would have done everything they could to get them out, but as it was, we have the most important things out of that house, and you wouldn't trade a child for anything that you had in there. So that deal is done. You know, that stuff is gone, but we have what was important out of the house.
When you think about what we see and what we do, you have to have a different personality in order to deal with it. It's an analogy that I've used many times in talking with individuals that I refer back to earlier in my career. I had opportunity to go and work in the private sector. And you know, we're referring to the three-piece suit and the big fancy cars, etc. And he said, that's respect. And I said, you know, driving in a big red truck down the street and seeing youngsters waving at you, to me, that's respect. And knowing that there's somebody walking on the street that's alive today because of the things that you have done.
How many miles to Babylon? 70 miles and 10. Can I get there by candlelight? Yes, and back again. It is, as I said, the great eraser. And we use it increasingly and hygienically to dispose of our earthly selves. Ed, in my Irish Catholic upbringing, cremation was a complete taboo. Burning your loved ones was something that Hindus and Protestants did. But it changed, and I was residually kind of dismayed when my parents decided that they would be cremated. Can you tell me why that taboo was there and how a religious taboo could get lifted?
Well, I think it comes from the Jesus going into the tomb, the whole body, and then being resurrected that way and not having that touched. And the respect for the body itself, not wanting to touch it or harm it in any way. And also there was the Christian mythology of martyrs' bones and relics. You wanted to keep those sacred things. It was actually kind of interesting that your parents would have wanted it, that they would have more been dyed in the wool, not cremation. They were decided to have it anyway, that they had gone through that change, because most people are pretty strong on that, want to stay with what the church says and respect for the body, see the body, have the body there.
Well, the irony was that my sister and I were sort of appalled. They just were being realistic, I think.
Right, right.
But was it dogma that got changed, or was it just...
No. Practice, I think. Practical practice, you know. Just in terms of space. It takes up less space to do it that way. But I don't think, no, it wasn't a dogma issue. It was more a pastoral care issue.
Really?
What would the family want? What would be best for them? If somebody feels really, really strongly, I must have the body, I must see it, it's got to be buried, you can't argue with them.
It didn't relate to the resurrection of the body in the last day?
Yes, it does relate to that. You want, and I think the church has been always huge on natural process, have everything be natural, which almost gets absurd, but that would be one of the natural things. Just let the body go naturally as it goes.
In stories from cultures all over the world, fire appears not as a gift from the gods, but as a theft from them. It came from the sky, as it still does, or from the depths of the earth, where we still go to steal it. But until the prairies were settled and broken, wildfire was a constant. Prairie fire shaped and nourished the open plains. Forest fire gave the parklands and boreal woods their own rich, complex identity. Gus, you know the boreal and the northern forest really well. Which one of them owes its shape more to fire?
I think they've both been influenced significantly by fire over the past centuries, and for the last 9,000 years, they've been variously shaped by fire in different aspects. Some of the boreal forest ecosystems don't burn quite as frequently as the northern ecosystems do, but in all, the majority of our forest is based on fire occurrences in terms of its growth and when it dies and when it's reborn.
Fire hits an area of boreal forest.
Yes.
Is it a complete wipeout?
Not always. In fact, rarely is it a complete wipeout. In our past, at least, it has not been that way, but as we seem to be experiencing more frequent drought periods in the past few years and in our history, the larger fires generated due to that drought and infrequent fires in some areas, especially the southern boreal forest, tend to concentrate burning material in the forest much more densely. And when that all dries out, it tends to turn into a catastrophic fire of some sort. We call it a catastrophic fire, which wipes out virtually everything in its path, including some of the soil. There is a compensation in that, and that while carbon is carried into the air, and that may be an issue in terms of greenhouse gas in the future, and I believe it is. It also deposits and concentrates nutrient in the ash that falls into the ground, and then the subsequent rains and snows and whatnot serve actually to leach some of that nutrient back into the ground and foster the new growth and the new forest that comes behind.
A catastrophic fire is your term in terms of a complete wipeout, but it's not catastrophic in this overall historical.
It isn't over time, but such a fire, what we call a killing fire, kills everything in the forest during its passage, tends to render that forest more sterile for subsequent growth for longer periods of time than a fire that quite simply rushes through an area and does not take all of the trees and all of the soil and that kind of thing. So,
Is the story different in the northern forest?
the story is somewhat different in the northern forest in that the trees there tend not to grow so densely. The fire cycle there is much shorter, averaging sometimes in the neighborhood of from 40 to 70 years for a whole forest to grow to maturity, begin to die back of the elements and fundamentally old age, and then have its turn burning. But that's the pure natural, or the pure and natural form of fire cycles. In many instances, the fire cycle is influenced by humans rather than purely natural forms, and the only really natural form is lightning. And some campfires, but those campfires were generated by indigenous people who lived here long before Europeans came to settle this land.
Are we hurting the forests by controlling the fires?
That's debatable. I mean, fire can be both beneficial to the forest, and there's a school of thought, of course, and a group of folks who really are interested in allowing fire to exist in its natural form, and that is that if it starts naturally, then let it burn naturally. But in this day and age, with so many people now in our northern forests, where there were not a great concentration of folks back even 200 years ago, it can also be detrimental to those folks and to their lives and to their properties. And so there is a delicate balance there between allowing it to burn, allowing fires to burn, and protection of things that humans hold dear.
One of your definitions, in fact, is wildfire management.
Yes, yes.
It's almost a contradiction.
It is.
I want to know what wildfire is for you. You deal with, you manage, and sometimes, obviously, are involved in fighting.
Yes,
This
of course.
creature,
Yes.
is it a creature?
It can be looked upon as a creature. It can be. It has in folklore and in literature been given a personality. It creeps along the ground. It licks the trees. It licks you if you're not careful.
Oh.
Yeah.
Does lightning prefer certain trees to others, or is it just the height?
I have no idea, to tell you the truth. It's usually the high one. If you're the tallest guy, you get it.
We can never trust fire or turn our backs upon it. We feed it, and it lies ready to consume us in return. Yet we love it. We draw close to it. It means comfort, though there is no terror to match it. It means life, though death flirts with us in every flame. But from the first hearth, in Africa, or Patagonia, or Indonesia, wherever it may have been, we are defined by fire as much as we are by air, or water, or earth. Prometheus leads us on.